Hello, I'm Joe Tucker, President of the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, and welcome to the Academy's official podcast, The Rule of Law, the Academy Speaks. Today, I have another good friend on the podcast, nationally known, I'll say internationally known, litigator, Ann Bremner. And we haven't seen each other since Vancouver. How are you doing?
Doing great. I just want to compliment you on what a wonderful job you're doing in general as president, of course, and in what you did in Vancouver. It was just a delight and beautifully done. And it's an honor to be on with you.
Well, thank you. Let's You started your professional career as a sex crimes prosecutor in Seattle.
Mhm.
How did those early years shape the kind of lawyer you've become?
It made me very cause driven, victim driven, and there was and justice driven because there was no money involved like in civil. You were dealing with people's lives, justice, and then getting victims, through something really difficult into the other side. And I loved it. I didn't think I would. I worked for a judge before that had been a prosecutor. And
Hmm.
he said, you should go to the prosecutor's office. And it was one of the best things, probably the best thing I've ever done in my career. And it gave me a chance to try a lot of cases and to know what juries look at in these kinds of cases, what judges look at, and how victims feel and how they basically get on with their lives. I've stayed in touch with quite a few people from those cases over the years, and that's been a while since I was in that office.
Now, Ann, every time I turn on the TV, you're there. You've handled some of the most notable cases, not just in the country, but throughout the world. You've written books, Justice in the Age of Judgment, and some of the higher profile cases. I want to talk about a few of them, and that's the Amanda Knox case that you handled. And I
Mhm.
believe it, and I'm paraphrasing you, but you give me the exact quote. You said Amanda was guilty before the trial started. What did you mean by that? And am I appropriately quoting you there?
You're always accurate and appropriately quoting me and everyone else. Yes, you are. And the cat that case, she had a great quote I just saw recently. She said, "I was patient zero in the cancel culture that we see today." I mean, she was like the first that was completely canceled on the internet before the trial even started. It was everywhere. Everything that was bad about her, that was false, of course, was on the internet, and everybody had confirmation bias, decided she's guilty.
Why don't you take back our listeners and just remind them a
Mhm.
little bit about the Amanda Knox case in case those people who were living in a cave. Help us remember what the Amanda Knox case was about.
It was 17 years ago, which is hard to believe, Joe, when this happened. But she was studying in Italy. She's from my hometown here in Seattle. And she'd been there a very short period of time when her roommate was horribly murdered. And she was accused of the crime right away, based on, they said, cartwheels and kisses. She was acting inappropriately. She was had a flat affect. They questioned her for umpteen hours without a lawyer, without a certified interpreter. They said she confessed. She didn't. And that was their probable cause, they said. And she served 4 years in prison. She had not one, not two, but three trials. We call it triple jeopardy. I mean, she was acquitted in the second trial, and then they tried her again after an acquittal. And then she was ultimately exonerated. So that's the case in a nutshell. And now she has a series on Hulu that started, I think, back on the 20th, that I think
Well,
is getting a lot of attention.
well, the troubling aspect about that is that which we talked about, and that was the media perception. And in the context of both the Amanda Knox case and just in general, we're going to talk about some of the other high profile cases that you've handled. How do you deal with and how does the media shape what actually happens in a courtroom and jurors' perceptions? I know it's a lot that I just gave you, but
Yeah,
you could peel that onion
I'll
or
peel
layer
it.
that onion down.
You know, in the internet age, which we of course are in. The question is, do we even have the presumption of innocence? That's really the question. And I think for us in the academy, something really important to address. Because is that threatened? Yes. Because obviously, in high profile cases and lower profile cases where there's any kind of attention on the internet, on social media, in mainstream, what we call it, um, there's some new word for um, old media, whatever that is, newspaper, CD. And everybody makes up their minds. And there's that one study that says 80% of jurors make up their minds in opening statement, and they never change. They just filter what they hear in the evidence through that opening statement. I know there's no scientific study that supports that, but it's often stated, and I think it's true. So, that's what we have going in. Amanda Knox was Foxy Knoxy. They said that she was basically somebody that was, I don't know what the word is, but she was sleeping with a lot of different people. They told her she had HIV, which was false. And they called her a she-devil. A she-devil. In fact,
I remember all of these terms.
right. Yeah, and that's something that they used in the media. And the other problem was, at least in Washington, when someone's arrested and held for trial, they can only be held 72 hours and have a case filed. If the case isn't in, they're free. Italy, it's 2 years. So Amanda had 2 years of basically a preliminary hearing that was sealed. So all we were hearing was salacious, false information that was being put out there. That she saw blood, that she knew how Meredith was positioned before the police saw her, that she had those crazy eyes, that she was going out looking for lingerie at the time after the murder, whispering sweet nothings to her boyfriend. That kind of iconic picture of them kissing in front of the murder scene.
Yes, we definitely remember that.
Yeah, so those were the things that were out there, and those were the things that convicted her before she really had a trial.
How do you deal, though, in this age of social media and where people get their reality before knowing what the reality is?
We became, to use Amanda's case, we became involved, and I say we because I had some great people here helping, forensic scientists, ex-FBI, screenwriters, writers, all kinds of people helping us. We got involved a year in. So by that time, a lot of the damage had been done. So what we tried to do was like turn around a super tanker of really false and salacious information by always, start locally, go globally. We started pushing out the real facts all the time. We got a hold of the New York Times. We got a hold of Anderson Cooper. We got a hold of the Italian media. And the thing that we had, Joe, that really, I think, helped turn things around were the crime scene tapes. I had those, and we called it Fellini forensics. I mean, it was terrible. They didn't have gloves on sometimes. They dropped a bra clasp that was part of the evidence. Only 2 items of evidence, a knife in that clasp. Took like 40 some odd days to collect. It went from white to black in the process. It got so dirty on the floor, and picked up and dropped. And that was used against Amanda and Raphael, as was a knife that was transported in a shoebox of all things. And then when you see the crime scene, they're also erasing some footprints in the blood. They have hair hanging down into the scene. They're talking, which you can't do in a scene because, of course, saliva has DNA and it contaminates the scene. And one part of it, somebody crashes through a window by mistake. I mean, somebody runs and crashes through a window. And then they spend a lot of time, for some reason, looking in the refrigerators, just, going on and on and on. This was so bad for us that know, in the course in the US and around the world, watching Forensic Files or watching anything that deals
Which I'm actually addicted to, Forensic Files.
I am too. I love Forensic Files. I'm totally addicted. But that everyone knows that is that's a bad crime scene, and that's the Amanda Knox crime scene. So I think it really helped people say, "Whoa, that this case doesn't really have an adequate basis." And when I did release those tapes, to release them to NBC, and they kind of went viral. And I felt like Daniel Ellsberg, releasing the Pentagon Papers, if anyone remembers that. But it was a bombshell, and it was a good one for Amanda Knox to start to turn some things around.
Well, I think what I liked about it too was your persistence, because I remember, any number of times, I can't even count the number of times you may recall that you were interviewed on CNN about the case and how the truth finally began to come out. And I was so proud of you doing that.
No, thank you. I did it for so long. And I remember my mother saying, why are you doing that? She said, when you went to Europe, you're a good girl. I'm like, oh, when I was 17, I'm like, Mom, that's not what this case is about. But it's like you had to keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And like you said, it's all the facts. You just got to get all the facts. Here's the crime scene. She didn't confess. Here it is in writing. She didn't have, there's no evidence of her at the scene. And independent experts were appointed in the second trial, and they said the only two items of evidence, that knife and the bra clasp, were contaminated, compromised, and inadmissible. That's when she came home.
Yeah, let me change gears about another case, another
Mhm.
high profile case that you represented the Zahu family
Mhm.
fight to overturn a suicide ruling. What
Right.
lesson did you take from that case about persistence in the face of official conclusions?
That's another one. When I got involved in Amanda Knox, I thought, oh, it'll be a couple of years, but it ended up being almost 2 decades. The Zahau case, likewise, was one I got involved with, and it, of course, went over a decade. So, that having been said,
Can you
that was
catch, for those people who aren't as familiar, many people, of course, know about Amanda Knox,
mhm.
but not the Zahu family and the suicide ruling.
So that was a case that was, for want of a better word, very bizarre. This was a case in Coronado and in a mansion where Rebecca Zahau was found hanging off a Juliet balcony in the back of this mansion. And I was retained by her family because the initial conclusion from the police was a suicide. It was a suicide. Now, let
Mhm.
me talk about just how she was found. That she was bound and gagged, but her hands were tied behind her back, like with nautical knots, like absolutely tied behind her back. Her feet were tied together with not only nautical knots, but nautical ropes. So we said, and I think anyone would say, it's not a suicide because how in the world could she tie herself up that way?
Well, I was going to say, how in the hell could you tie
I
yourself
don't
up
know,
that way?
right? Right. I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? Like it was like I said, there's never been a history of a suicide like that in the history of the world. So why is this the first? And and so then they did some demonstrations where they kind of looped some, ropes behind someone's back. No, these were tied. These were nautical ties. And the exact amount of rope for her to go over the side, somehow was measured because she was on the ground. She was hanging from that second story balcony.
Yes.
A couple other things. The bed had actually been picked up and moved. That she was tied to a bed. It wasn't dragged. There was a painting on the door that said, "She saved him. Can you save her?" And so that was the scene. And then the underlying incident was a little boy, the son of her boyfriend, had fallen down the stairs and was in the hospital at the time that she's found. He later tragically died. And so that was kind of the scenario of what happened. So the police called it a suicide. We came in with our bells on to try and say, this is clearly not a suicide, because as we all know, if it's a suicide, there's no investigation. It's over. And
Correct.
we got all the police reports. We went through with and had all kinds of evidence, and I hired a very famous pathologist who just passed away, a wonderful man, Dr. Cyril Wecht. And we actually had her body exhumed. And the findings were as follows. She had lividity in her back, which is, as you know, is where your blood settles when you die.
Hmm.
Not in her feet, not in her legs. She died on her back, and she died of strangulation on her back, not from the hanging. And that was pivotal. Was it pivotal to the police? No. They continue to say it was a suicide until this day. They say it's a suicide. And that will be on a Netflix special, which I'm really happy about because maybe something else comes out in the evidence. Maybe somebody else comes forward. But let me also say this, the brother of the boyfriend was found civilly liable for killing her.
You don't handle any low
Right?
profile cases.
Right. It's
Well,
like,
let's talk about the Susan Cox Powell case,
okay,
another big Ann Bremner case.
yeah. So Susan Cox Powell went missing in Utah. She was married and had 2 kids. She was married to a man named Josh Powell. Josh Powell went camping with his kids who were in diapers and at midnight in the mountains in a snowstorm. And all of a sudden his wife disappears. They find blood in the house, $3.5 million of insurance he had on her, a note that she put in a safe deposit box that says, if anything happens to me, Josh killed me. I mean, it's right out of forensics files.
That is directly
Right.
forensics
Scripted.
file.
Right.
Investigate.
Right. And so he comes, he leaves with the kids and he comes, where's he come? To my state, Washington State, with the kids. And there's a search warrant executed at his house in connection with the death or disappearance of his wife. And the police find a house of horrors in there, gallows hanging from the ceiling, his brother running around naked or in a diaper, a painting of a woman with a sword up her vagina, and porn everywhere on computers, including some images of the little girls next door that his dad is filming in the bathroom. Take the kids into custody. They give them to my clients, the grandparents, the parents of Susan. And there's all kinds of red flags, including that Josh was going to have to take a polygraph in connection with this, and basically a sex offense kind of evaluation. And as I said before to you off camera, no child has died in visitation in a secure setting in this country.
Yes.
None. They didn't do that here. They put him with the children in his house after they had about 50 red flags about him, including that killed animals as a kid, molested his sister, molested other children. He held a knife on his mother when she asked him to do the dishes. I mean, all kinds of different red flags for this individual for potential filicide. And they had a woman that was not physically capable of dealing with Josh, just physically. It's not her fault, but she was the one that did the supervised visit, which only means somebody shows up and drops off the kids, really.
Yes.
So she drops off
and left the kids alone.
Yeah, and left the kids alone with him. He slams the door, he locks it, he kills the kids with the hatchet, and then he sets the house on fire. And it took 10 minutes for them to die. Dr. Wecht in this case too. There's something in the back of your brain called the reticular activating system, which is where your consciousness is. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, the hatchet didn't touch that. So we knew that those children were conscious until the house blew up.
Yeah.
So we tried this case to a jury during the pandemic. We had to recess in the middle of it, and all those jurors came back because they knew they wanted to be part of a case that says you don't have reunification at any cost. You have to have the best interest of the child. That we needed to have that shift, and the jury awarded $115 million against the state of Washington. And it's
thank
just
you for
great.
doing that, Ann.
Yeah, thank you. I cried when it came in, but those jurors, when they came in after they were gone for a couple of months, they heard the first part of the case, and they were gone for a couple of months, and they came back with our masks on and bandanas and everything.
Yes.
They just kind of nodded like, we're here. We're going to see this through, which is amazing. Amazing jury.
Now, Ann, one of the things there are many things I love about you, but one of the major things I love about you, as opposed to the many talking heads who are on TV who are not real, what I consider, and this is me being judgmental, who are not real trial lawyers.
Right.
You've been a regular commentator on national TV, and not being a talking head, but a practicing trial lawyer. How do you approach explaining complex legal issues to a mass audience without oversimplifying it or dumbing it down?
There's, speaking of Italy and Amanda Knox, there's this great Italian word called sprezzatura, and it basically means, taking complicated things and making them simple. I feel like lawyers a lot of times take simple things and make them complex, especially in civil practice when depositions can take 5 days and, the trials are not like trial lawyers involving trial lawyers like you, an excellent trial lawyer. And I think that it's almost like a little morality play on television. You have to what was the issue, and then how do we analyze that? And then what does it mean? So people can connect, I think, with what you're talking about. What does it really mean? And that's kind of the way I approach it. I don't get in fights with people. I wait for my turn, and if they don't come to me, they don't come to me. But I think it's so important to educate the public like you're doing, far more than I am, to basically understand the system. People want to know. I mean, I love it that people like want to know about forensic files, know about trials, big and small, and like what happening with Epstein right now. That's so unresolved, and people are really, really invested. And I think that's been true in almost all of these cases that have been in the media. But I think the explanation that we have to do as lawyers, super important. Not to take sides,
Yeah.
but to explain what's in the case.
Well, we are going to have, well, we've had Jack Scarola and Brad
Right.
Edwards, who are two of the leading civil prosecutors of Epstein, on the podcast also. But
Excellent.
yeah, one of the things I want to talk to you about, which concerns me, and I think it concerns you also, it should concern all of us. And this is from a criminal defense standpoint. You said that the presumption of innocence is under siege in our
Mhm.
digital age.
Mhm.
How do we push back, or how do we get the media to neutralize that?
I think it takes transparency, Joe. I think that all cases, including federal, need to allow access. Look at the R. Kelly case. Look at Ghislaine Maxwell. Look at Diddy's case, federal. No cameras in the courtroom. Why? I know. I think the last time it was addressed by uh, Chief Justice Roberts. That they want to not have cameras in federal courtrooms. Why? I think the answer is let everybody see what's going on if they want to. Let
Yes.
everybody have access if they want it. And then they can know, and we can talk about on the air, to help what's happening. I always think that like commentary on television is almost like the sports commentators, because in trials, you don't really know what's going to happen. That's why we love them. You hope you're going to win, right? But there's always surprises. There's always something that happens that you want to talk about in a trial. I mean, I've seen all kinds of different things happen in trial, and I think the ones we watch, there's things that you want to, have analyzed. Especially, was the defendant going to take the stand? What are they going to say? What are the strategies of these lawyers? And
So
and so,
if I'm hearing you, then are you saying one aspect of transparency are cameras in the
yes,
courtroom that you'd like to see?
yes, I think we should have cameras in all courtrooms. When you look at some of the justifications against, they used to talk about camera flashes. They talk about we don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
Everyone can take out their phone. They talk about disruptions. Well, just have a feed camera, a pull camera, and then everyone else can have that. They've talked about the lawyers are going to act differently. They really don't. I mean, you get pretty used, right? You get pretty used to it. I guess we're all on camera these days, right?
Yes, we
So,
are.
so those were the things that were raised, and those things are no longer, really applicable. So therefore, I think we should always have cameras in the courtroom, including in federal court.
And you've had, by any measure, a great career, and you continue to have a great career. It seems like you're just in the midst of it and you're busy. But if you could look back 2025 back, is there one trial or case that stands out as the most transformative for you personally?
You know, I think it would be the Cox case. I've tried, a lot of cases, and I know you have too. And that one got me. It was like, and I know this goes way back, and most people, you're probably too young for this one too, but the Young Bloods, Jesse Cullen Young, at that
Yes.
time, get together. I played that every morning. And when I went into court, because it had the line that said, you can you can make the mountains ring or you can make the angels cry. And I was like, you can make the mountains ring, you can make this case happen for these kids, a memorial to them that they mean something. And for then all the kids in my state and beyond, that they mean something and they're not going to go through what Charlie and Braden went through. And so, you make the mountains ring and make the angels cry. And I thought that every day that was my mantra. And when that jury came back, I just thought, this is amazing, amazing day. And I'll just never get over that, that, and I know everyone else involved in the case, my team and the jurors who we stayed in touch with, that was very meaningful. And I've had a lot of cases that were meaningful, but that one I think was most. And I've had some cases recently representing police officers in criminal cases, including a murder case. And I'll tell you, when someone's acquitted of murder and it's your client, that's a big one too.
Well, that's the other side of the coin
Hmm.
that you've done. You've represented some high profile criminal defense cases where you've represented police officers accused of murder.
Yeah.
How are you able to do that? And in the face of that, you know that there is a death here at the hands of the officer. Tell us about that and your fidelity to the rule of law.
I felt that the last one I had was a murder case, and there were three officers on trial, and my client was on trial for manslaughter, and it was a very high profile case, and the family was very involved, and there were a lot of protesters, a lot of media interest, and everything else. I knew, in terms of the rule of law, that my client was not responsible. He was third on the scene. He was not involved in what happened in terms of alleged brutality, et cetera. He came last on the scene, and this was also an overdose case. And I knew that I had a client that was not guilty, and I knew that the press before that, speaking to media, was so against him, and all kinds of false information about him all the time. And sometimes I think it's important when you have that much terrible media to just try that in the courtroom. And people, I had reporters say, I didn't know that or this. I didn't know this part. I didn't know this is what happened. And it's like a discovery process there when we didn't speak to the media beforehand because my client didn't want to.
And I've had those cases where you've had the public perception of what has happened and you know the facts. I generally don't comment to the media
Mhm.
and let the case play out
Exactly.
in the courtroom.
Mhm.
How do you handle that when there is this? And I want to put on the side the Amanda Knox case, but like this police case where you knew the facts and the media and the public didn't know the facts because they weren't there in the courtroom every day hearing all the evidence. How do you deal with that?
I actually had two cases like this that were police cases, and I, I it was amazing to a lot of these reporters what the true facts were, and they would say that to me, like, well, and especially at the end when it was over, my officer and the other officers were acquitted. What was out in the media was in opposite to what was presented in court, and the reporters, that were there, they heard it, and they were amazed at the difference. And so I think you try your case. Although I'm somebody that if they're reporting something wrong, I, I'll on my phone like write to them and say that's not what the witness just said. I mean, I tend to do some of that, and they're like, "Oh, great, Anne's writing me a note again," right? But
Good for you.
yeah,
Good for you keeping them honest.
yeah, there she is again. Like that's not what they said, like in real time. But I exactly like you're a wonderful lawyer, and I'm so honored to be on with you. And you're exactly right. You just, it's just kind of you unveil what the truth is. That's what a courtroom's for. And
Yes.
and that's great when reporters and the public can see, oh, that's what happened. Oh, that's justice. Oh, that verdict makes sense. We can live with that verdict and the system works.
And I want to thank you for fighting the fight. And
Yeah.
as I indicated, having such fidelity to the rule of law. We appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you being in the academy, and I love seeing you all the time. I want to know if there are any closing words you want to give us here.
Well, my closing word is I'm so honored to be on with you, Joe, and we love you as our president. You've just done an amazing job, and I think it's so important to uphold the rule of law and to talk about the rule of law, and that's what you've been doing. In this atmosphere today, I think a lot of people would say that the rule of law is a lot under siege. And I
Yes.
think the Academy of all places is the place to speak about, but also work toward upholding the rule of law. So I applaud you personally and the Academy for doing that. And I'm honored to be here.
I'm Joe Tucker, President of the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, and thank you for listening to The Rule of Law, the Academy Speaks. Take care, everyone.